How can a miner in his 20s rise to become the Klondike's unchallenged king? He accomplishes this by taking a big chance and discovering something that no one else was even aware existed. Parker Schnabel discovered an artifact from the past. Sometimes the greatest treasures are buried in plain sight, as demonstrated by an ancient wash plant that was so full with lost gold that it almost doubled the size of his season's haul. However, a harsh lesson was about to be taught to him. A significant discovery like this makes you a target as well as a king. The all-in wager of $15 million. You must realize that Parker Schnabel's actions were utterly insane. You have to be cautious when it comes to gold mining. You survive to fight another season because you make wise wagers. But Parker hurled the rulebook into a frozen creek because he was so hungry that he left his competitors behind. He spent an absurd $15 million for a huge tract of land called Dominion Creek, pushing all of his chips to the center of the table. This went beyond simply purchasing a claim. This involved purchasing an empire and a large area of the Yukon that was said to contain fabled gold riches. However, rumors don't cover expenses. In actuality, it was a risky all-in wager that had the potential to either solidify his reputation or leave him penniless and unable to leave his home. This was the biggest shot of his life, and he was living up to the famous hockey player Wayne Gretzky's saying, which he frequently recited, "You miss 100% of the shots you don't take." Parker set an almost unachievable target to even attempt to justify the price tag. But it's an extra expense at the moment. Although it's not yet ready for sleuthing, we can prepare it with a little ripping. He promised the world and his workers that in one grueling mining season, he would extract 5,000 ounces of gold from the earth. That's more than 300 pounds of pure gold. To put it in perspective, you're talking about an incredible $10 million at today's prices. The number was intended to create a statement. The pressure was crushing and instantaneous. At Dominion Creek, each day felt like a struggle for survival. It was deafening how loudly the financial clock was ticking. Fuel alone was an enormous expense for his fleet of enormous equipment, easily amounting to tens of thousands of dollars per day. Payroll was a continual burden for his devoted but worn-out staff. Any delay or malfunction wasn't only a bother. It was a financial disaster that made his dream seem more and more distant. The country itself retaliated fiercely. They struck areas of permafrost and frozen ground with such force that they might break the steel teeth of an excavator bucket. They searched through acres of useless rock, finding nothing and watching the fuel burn. After a week of discovering almost nothing, the hope that blossomed one day with a decent cleanup would be destroyed. Even the hardest miner could be broken by this soul-destroying loop. The squad was constantly racing against the clock, the weather, and their own extreme fatigue. Based on our methodology in determining the most effective way to accomplish things, I anticipate some calibration issues. Like those issues are to be expected. Such an enterprise teetered on the brink of complete disaster and amazing triumph. The silent desperation and ongoing worry of knowing that one significant technical breakdown or poor choice may bring down the entire $15 million house of cards are things that no one watching TV truly notices. The pressure was increasing. The machinery was under stress. Then everything would change when a chance contact with a piece of rusty trash occurred in a remote area of the forest. But discovering a historical ghost was only the first step. Parker was about to learn that this artifact was concealing a much more valuable and perilous secret than he could have ever dreamed. Parker Schnabel found something that would not only transform his season, but also possibly his entire life, just as everything seemed to be coming to a head, due to a never-ending cycle of mechanical breakdowns and persistent uncertainty. It resembled discovering a ghost. A large abandoned machine known as a trommel lay there, half buried in mud, moss, and time. It was a holdover from a bygone era. A huge rusted steel tube, encased in a thick layer of overgrown vegetation and soiled by decades of dirt. You need something that's incredibly simple to work on, because of how many hours we run. Yes. Additionally, everything about this is custom. Additionally, I believe you would struggle because it would be a full-time job for someone. It appeared as though no one had touched it in ages. An abandoned memorial to a dashed hope. You stopped and stared at it because of its sheer enormity. This was not your typical piece of gear. It was a monster designed specifically for big volume mining, a brute. You see, this tragedy would have been churning through gobs and tons of pay dirt every day in its peak. Water was used to separate the heavier gold from the worthless stuff as it tumbled rocks, mud, and gravel in its enormous rotating drum. Here's the worst part though. For all these years, the secret has been sitting here in the open. It was well recognized that the technology of the time was extremely inefficient. A significant portion of the smaller, finer gold, the stuff that truly counts, would have literally been washed away with the remaining tailings, slipping through the crevices. The murmurs and whispers are what no one discusses. For years, the Klondike's elderly population had been hearing tales about this abandoned location. The Big Trommel was a component of a massive, once rich operation that was unexpectedly and abruptly abandoned. According to local traditions that are repeated over campfires like ghost stories, the business may have failed. Perhaps they ran into an impenetrable permafrost wall, or perhaps, according to some of the most sinister stories, a horrible incident occurred in the far countryside. According to mythology, there was still gold in the dirt mounds that the old miners had left behind, pay dirt that had been allowed to decay, and was so wealthy that it was illegal. However, nobody has ever ventured to verify. The assertion was too far away. The machine was too big to relocate or repair. Up until now, it was a fool's errand. Parker dismissed the decades of deterioration, driven by that unique sense of gold that distinguishes the great miners from the good ones. I believe that the majority of this run was in ditches. Yes, removing gravel. We're in the right place if that's a sign of things to come. He shined a flashlight into the musty, murky interior of the enormous drum and examined it closely. Then he noticed it. There was a slight flash of something yellow and sparkling. It brought him to a complete stop. In his chest, his heart thumped. There on the edge of the corroded steel was a pool of gold. This was no mere antiquated device. It was a time capsule containing wealth, a treasure trove. The discovery was amazing, a startling stroke of good fortune just when he needed it most. Parker, however, could not have realized the true nature of the phantom ship as he stood there gazing at the treasure. It was a roadmap that led to a far greater reward and a direct confrontation with the Yukon's most formidable forces, a Rusty Titan's resurrection. It was one thing to discover a gold-filled machine, but it was quite another to bring that multi-ton unrust-welded beast back to life. This was more than a simple repair. It was a full-scale resurrection, a titanic struggle against deterioration, rust, and time that would push Parker's crew to the limit. Getting to the object was the first obstacle. To even get their heavy machinery close, they had to clear a way through the thick woods. Moving the enormous machine to a location where they could properly operate on it was the next nearly difficult task. Every bolt has corrosion on it. Decades of freezing and thawing deformed every metal plate. The staff was working feverishly. This project was the result of pure obsession. They had an instinct that made their hearts race. The possible payoff was worth the crazy effort. Numerous parts have to be replaced or carefully repaired. Every weld had to be flawless. From the massive gears that resembled something from a medieval torture device to the primary steel drum itself, which was pocked with holes. Each replacement component is designed to endure the harsh pressures of an operating wash plant. They discovered something new just when you thought it could get any stranger. They discovered a huge, untended pile of dirt next to the trauma as they cleared the area around it. It was this. The first miners never had a chance to process the pay dirt they had dug up. It was legendary stuff. Parker reached for a pan of gold. He grabbed a sample from the pile, his hands trembling a little. His gaze was fixed on the pan's bottom as he twirled the dirt in the water. The pan's bottom started to shine as the lighter sand washed away. That's crazy. A beginning has been made. Mitch, we're on the board. That's a really great pan. After then, it was covered. There were significantly more golden flakes in that one pan than they were discovering in their main Dominion Creek operation. It was a confirmed grade A jackpot. So it wasn't simply promising. The crew felt an electric shockwave from this finding. They promptly erected a makeshift processing facility on the property, a Frankenstein's monster of contemporary cell boxes and pumps that have been specially designed to fulfill their function. They had to be careful not to overlook any of the valuable gold particles. Parker was aware that the stakes were very high. He continued, "There's a lot of pressure on revenue right now, but with 2 plants running, you know we have a shot." They couldn't have imagined the outcome. The initial cleanups were breathtaking. The sloughs were filled with gold. Every day's weigh-ins turned, become occasions for both celebration and incredulity. The value of the gold simply increased, swiftly and amazingly reaching the hundreds of thousands. Then $1 million, and finally $2 million. The mother lode had been hit. The Titan they had brought back to life was showering them with wealth. However, this extraordinary wealth served like a lighthouse in the shadows. In the Klondike, news of this magnitude spreads quickly. Parker was going to discover that a fortune brings a very dangerous type of attention. And his incredible discovery was no longer a secret. Parker's crew discovered something else that was, in a sense, even more valuable than the gold itself. While the resurrected trauma was busy spewing forth a wealth, they discovered a collection of water-damaged and oil-stained logbooks and papers hidden away in a rusted-out tool locker close to the old machine. They initially appeared to be trash, but after thorough investigation, they discovered a tale. These were not only records of maintenance, they were a map. It was evident from the historical records that the ghost trauma had not only worked here, it had been a component of a much bigger mining strategy that was dispersed throughout the area from hotspot to hotspot. Coordinates, rough hand-drawn maps, and comments on the quality of the gold from locations with names like Ruby Creek and Last Chance Gully were all documented on the faded pages. A clear narrative was conveyed by the numbers that scrolled in the margins. It was a ghost-drawn treasure map that pointed the way to more riches, more chances, and perhaps even more significant discoveries. This altered the entire game for Parker. His fortunate discovery was more than a one-time prize. It was a clue, a key that might open up an entire web of undiscovered gold claims. The problem with the Klondike, however, is this: no secrets exist. Like wildfire, word spread about Parker's amazing discoveries. The child who discovered the abandoned trauma was the topic of conversation among truckers, suppliers, and other miners. And those in positions of authority hear that kind of speech. In particular, it made its way to the ears of the Viking, the renowned hard-nosed mining veteran Tony Beets. In actuality, Parker and Tony have always had a bitter rivalry. The elderly master is up against the youthful Shot. For years, they have been at odds over territory, gear, and pride. Tony would have been familiar with the myths surrounding the abandoned claims, because he himself owns vast tracts of property. It would have been a direct challenge to hear that Parker had not only discovered one, but was now extracting millions from it. Even worse, Parker now had a map to additional possible honey holes once the logbooks were found. Some of them might even be on property Tony owned or had his eye on. The tension in the situation increased dramatically. Parker was no longer only battling the icy terrain, he had his eyes on his shoulder. A huge target had been placed on his back by the finding. According to reports, other miners who smelled money began to investigate about his claims. The Klondike's friendly competition was on the verge of becoming something much more serious. Now that he had discovered the gold, he needed to protect it. Although the ghost map he was holding was invaluable, it was also a liability and a potential cause of strife that would lead to a fight for legacy and territory. Parker was headed for his 5,000-ounce target. However, he was also about to enter a fierce competition and jealousy storm that might end his record-breaking season. A season that will go down in history was accompanied with the thunderous roar of the revived trauma. The gold began to accumulate at a rate that was simply unprecedented, especially when combined with the consistent output from his main operation at Dominion Creek. The daily weigh-ins gained notoriety. The shelves of the gold room were lined with jars of fine dust and glittering nuggets of gold, a tribute to Parker's wild risk and the crew's unrelenting efforts. Not only did they reach their 5,000-ounce target, but they completely destroyed it. The fact that we broke 5,000 ounces for the season is the nice and cool aspect. According to reports, the ultimate total exceeded 8,000 ounces of gold, which was astounding. That is almost twice the first, seemingly unachievable goal. You are looking at a gross value of considerably over $15 million, possibly even close to $16 million. At a conservative price, Parker had not only recouped his whole $15 million land investment in one terrible season. Thank you. Well done. Then, how will this work? I'll grab my toothbrush and head out, but had made a healthy profit as well. He had declared himself the Klondike's new unchallenged ruler. Parker became the clear king after an amazing season. But was his crown earned by skill or by pure luck? Tell us below. For more, like and subscribe.